The cameras were rolling, and the bright lights lit up the set of a global broadcast watched by millions around the world. On one side sat Bishop T.D. Jakes, the world-renowned pastor known for his powerful sermons and influence across the Christian world. Across from him sat a man much younger, but already a historic figure, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, a revolutionary leader who has been shaking the very foundations of Western narratives about Africa, freedom, and faith. People gathered in churches, homes, and online to witness what many called an unimaginable moment. It wasn't every day that one of America's most famous pastors sat face to face with one of Africa's boldest leaders. To some, Traoré was a hero. To others, a threat. But one thing was certain, his voice could not be silenced. Bishop Jakes leaned forward, his voice calm yet commanding. President Traoré, I've been following your words about Africa's future, about independence, about breaking chains. Your passion is undeniable. But today, I want to ask you something that goes beyond politics. What is your view of Christianity? What does it mean to the people of Burkina Faso? The studio went silent. The kind of silence that makes everyone hold their breath, waiting for words that will be remembered. Traoré inhaled deeply, adjusted his microphone, and looked straight into the camera. Not just at Jakes, but at millions watching across continents. Bishop Jakes, he began, his voice steady but powerful. Christianity is not foreign to Africa. Long before missionaries came, long before colonial empires used religion as a weapon, Africa already knew the Creator. We already prayed, fasted, sought guidance, and respected the Almighty. What came later by force was not faith, it was control. Bishop Jakes raised an eyebrow. He could feel this was about to go deeper, maybe even controversial. Traoré continued, his tone firm. The Christianity introduced to Africa was not always the Christianity of Christ. It was often the Christianity of conquest. They came with the Bible in one hand and the whip in the other. They told us, obey your masters, while they stole our land, our people, and our dignity. They told us to wait for heaven while they built empires on earth. Gasps filled the audience. Some nodded, others shifted uneasily in their seats. Jakes leaned back, watching closely, deciding whether to interrupt or let the storm unfold. But Traoré's voice softened slightly. I do not reject Christianity. No, I embrace Christ. But I reject the version of Christianity corrupted by politics, slavery, and colonization. Jesus was not a colonizer. Jesus was not an oppressor. Jesus was a liberator. He stood with the poor, the rejected, and those society despised. That, he said, tapping the table with his finger, is the Christianity Africa must reclaim. Jakes finally spoke. So, Mr. President, are you saying that Christianity as it has been practiced is false? Traoré leaned in closer. I am saying this. Christianity without justice is incomplete. Christianity that preaches salvation but ignores oppression, that is not the Christianity of Jesus. A faith that tells the slave to obey, but tells the master nothing about repentance, that is not the gospel. And that, he paused, letting his words sink in, is why Africa must rise not only politically, but spiritually. We must remove the chains, not just from our land, but from our minds. Applause erupted across the live audience and on social media. Hashtags began trending instantly. #Trader speaks. #Christiana Tyra claimed. #Truth and faith. But Traoré wasn't done. He leaned back and spoke with even more conviction. In the book of Exodus, God freed the children of Israel from Pharaoh. That story is not just history, it is prophecy for all oppressed people. Africans are not waiting for another Moses. We must be our own Moses. Faith without action is empty. Prayer without justice is powerless. If we truly believe in God, then we must stand against every pharaoh of our time, whether it wears a crown, a suit, or hides behind systems of exploitation. Bishop Jakes nodded slowly, the weight of the words heavy on him. He had preached about liberation, empowerment, and breaking barriers, but here was a young African leader reminding him and the entire Christian world that the gospel was not just about hymns on Sunday. It was about transforming societies. Traoré then turned directly to Bishop Jakes and spoke words that shook the Christian world. Bishop, let me tell you the truth. If your preaching does not free the African child from hunger, if your church does not defend the African farmer whose land is stolen, if your faith does not protect the African mother who dies in childbirth because hospitals lack resources, then your Christianity is nothing more than entertainment. And Africa has no more time for entertainment. We need truth. We need power. We need freedom. The room erupted again. Gasps. Claps. Shock. Some people sat frozen, others leaned forward with tears in their eyes. But no one could ignore the fire in his words. Bishop Jakes leaned in and asked softly, Mr. President, then what is Christianity to you? Traoré's answer came quickly, sharp, and unshaken. Christianity is not about cathedrals. It is not about titles. It is not about the wealth of preachers while their people starve. Christianity is about the power of love, the courage of truth, and the demand for justice. If it is not about these things, then it is not the Christianity of Christ. The broadcast cut to faces in the audience, some in tears, others in disbelief. Around the world, pastors in America, bishops in Europe, and priests in Africa were already preparing rebuttals. But one thing was undeniable. Ibrahim Traoré had lit a fire that would not be put out. And he wasn't done. As a leader, Traoré continued, I am not against churches. I am not against preachers. I am against lies. I am against using the name of God to keep my people poor. The same Bible that says, obey your masters, also says, let my people go. Which one will you choose? As for me, I will always choose freedom. That is my Christianity. By now, millions watching at home were glued to their screens. WhatsApp groups across Africa buzzed with voice notes replaying his words. YouTube clips were already going viral before the live show even ended. Some pastors were outraged, others inspired, but everyone knew. Traoré had just redefined the conversation about faith in Africa. Bishop Jakes sat quietly, realizing this was not just a debate. It was a revelation. And though he disagreed on some points, even he could not deny the urgency of the call. The first half of the discussion ended with Traoré's voice ringing through the air. Christianity in Africa must return to Christ, not to colonizers, not to empires, not to systems of oppression. If we cannot stand with the oppressed, then we do not stand with Jesus. And if we claim to love God but ignore justice, then our faith is a lie. That is the truth Africa must face, and the truth the world must hear. The broadcast went to commercial break, but across the globe, conversations had already started. Something had shifted. Something had broken. Something new had been born. As the cameras returned, Traoré leaned back in his chair, locking eyes with Bishop Jakes. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. What came next was not just for the man across from him, but for millions of Christians who would one day hear this story. Bishop, Traoré began again, his voice steady yet warm. Faith is not meant to be inherited like land or money. Faith is something you must choose, test, and live out. Too many of our people, both in Africa and in the West, treat Christianity like an identity card, not a way of life. They say they are Christians, but if you look closer, you find no Christ in their actions. Bishop Jakes nodded slowly, his fingers interlaced. He had spent decades preaching about transformation, but here was a young African president reframing it with raw clarity. Tell me more, Jakes encouraged.
Traoré leaned in closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. In Burkina Faso, when I see churches filled every Sunday, I don't measure people's faith by the songs they sing or the money they give. I measure it on Monday morning. Does the shopkeeper cheat his customer less because he sang in the choir the day before? Does the farmer treat his workers with more dignity because he prayed at the altar? If our Christianity does not change the way we live in society, then it is not Christianity, it is only religion. And religion by itself has never saved anyone. The bishop's eyes widened. He had preached similar truths in his own way for years. But hearing them now, from a young president who carried the burden of leading a nation, struck him differently. Traoré's voice grew stronger. When Jesus spoke in Matthew 25, he said, "When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me." He did not say, "When I was preaching, you clapped. When I was singing, you danced." He paused, then continued firmly. "Bishop, my fear is that too many churches today are full of noise, but empty of Christ." The room went silent, as though everyone was holding their breath. At last, Bishop Jakes whispered softly, "You are saying, we have majored in the minor, and minored in the major." Traoré gave a small smile. "Exactly. And let me be clear, Bishop, if Christianity is to survive in Africa, it must return to its roots. Not the roots planted by colonial missionaries, but the roots of Jesus himself. The Christ who walked dusty roads, who sat with sinners, who knelt to wash his disciples' feet. If we replace him with a Christ of golden chairs, designer suits, and private jets, then we are no longer worshipping Christ, we are building idols in his name." The bishop felt the word slam into him like a hammer. He had heard critics of prosperity preaching and celebrity culture before. But hearing it now from a head of state, Spock, not with resentment but with conviction, gave the words a weight he could not dismiss. Traoré rose from his chair and began pacing slowly, each step deliberate. "I ask myself often, if Jesus walked into our churches today, would he even recognize his message? Would he see love, forgiveness, humility, or would he see performance, competition, and greed? My fear, Bishop, is that he would overturn our offering baskets just as he overturned the tables in the temple." Jake's chest tightened. His thoughts wandered to his own ministry, the grand stage, the cameras, the countless programs. He thought of the thousands who looked to him for spiritual guidance. And he felt the sting of the young president's challenge. Traoré stopped pacing, turned toward him, and spoke with piercing clarity. "Let me tell you something from the heart. In my country, people are very poor. They don't come to church for music or preaching, they come because they desperately need hope. Yet even when they give their last coin in tithes, the church buys new instruments while widows and orphans remain hungry. Do you see the problem, Bishop? We are feeding the altar but starving the people." Jake's throat tightened. He whispered, almost trembling, "You are calling us back to Acts 2. Traoré's eyes lit up. "Yes. In Acts, the believers shared everything. No one was hungry, no one was left without shelter. That is true Christianity. It is not about who owns the largest building, but about who carries the largest heart. If revival is to come, whether in Africa or in America, it will not be through crusades or conferences. It will come when communities live as Christ lived." He walked back, placed a hand gently on Jake's shoulder, and added, "Bishop, I don't say this to condemn you or any pastor. I say it because the whole world is watching. They are asking if Christianity is truly able to transform lives, or if it has become just another system of power. Our answer must be clear." Tears welled in the bishop's eyes. He had counseled kings, presidents, and countless leaders in his lifetime. But here was a man half his age, speaking with the authority of a prophet. With his voice breaking, Jake finally spoke. "Mr. President, you have shaken me. You've reminded me why I began preaching in the first place. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because Jesus saved me, and I wanted others to know his love. But you're right, along the way, we've lost something." Traoré nodded slowly. "Then let us find it again. Let us teach people that Christianity is not Sunday entertainment, it is daily sacrifice. Let us remind them that the cross was not made of gold, but of rough wood, stained with blood. That is the faith that can save Africa. That is the faith that can save the world." For a moment, the room stood still. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the floor. It felt as though heaven itself leaned in to listen. Finally, Bishop Jake stood, grasping Traoré's hand firmly. "Mr. President," he said with emotion, "I came here to encourage you, but you have ministered to me. I will carry this word back to my people, and I will preach it until the day God calls me home. Christianity must return to Christ." Traoré smiled gently. "And when it does, Bishop, the world will see a revival like never before. Not a revival of noise and flashing lights, but a revival of love, justice, and truth." The meeting ended in prayer. But it was not a polished, stage-ready prayer. It was simple, raw, and heartfelt. Two men, one a preacher, the other a president, bowing before the same king. They asked not for wealth or power, but for courage to live the gospel in its purest form. When they rose from their knees, Jake looked at Traoré one last time and whispered, "You have changed my concept of Christianity today." Traoré shook his head gently. "Not I, Bishop. Christ has." And with that, a conversation had ended, but a movement had begun. A story that carried more weight than any sermon, more power than any conference. A reminder that the gospel is not locked in cathedrals, nor chained to pulpits. It is alive, living in the hearts of those willing to live it fully.